be very cautious of trying to max anything. Because trying to max any variable has a way, it's like the Goodhart's law kind of thing, right? Like when you try to overdo one particular, you make one number go up, you will compromise some other thing along the way that spoils the whole thing. If you can laugh while you are in the struggle between cosmic challenges, then that's the path of like freedom and peace and joy, hopefully.
Hello, and welcome back to Eclectic Spacewalk. I'm your host, Nicholas McKay. Today on Conversations, we are pleased to be joined by Visakan Veerasamy. Visa is the author of 2 ebooks, Friendly Ambitious Nerds and Introspect. He is also better known as the unofficial godfather of Twitter. Now, Visa is a prolific creative that has an infectious curiosity in many domains of knowledge. From being a bibliophile with his love for books, or a quote, switchboard for earnest nerds, there is something for everyone to learn from Visa. We think you are really going to enjoy this one. Now, before we play the episode, I would ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and reach more people, as well as continue to have more interesting discussions with eclectic guests. Also, tell us in the comments what your favorite part of the talk was and who we should invite on next. Now, on to the discussion. First off, let's talk about your curiosity journey. I've read a lot of your stuff, the library ethos, and kind of how you started off in libraries, and then also the internet kind of just hit you over the head with its possibilities. Kind of talk us how you were first curious, and then how you kind of grew into that curiosity as you grew older.
It's interesting. I feel like I can get kind of meta about this really quickly because I never really had a very good explanation until very recently. So like I used to just be like, okay, when I was a kid, I read a lot of books. I like reading books, but like, why? Right. And it only very recently kind of clicked for me that when I was very young, I was raised largely by a domestic helper. So both my parents were very busy. Both my parents were very busy running their family business. So I was very attached to our helper, and then she left. And I think that was a very like traumatic incident for me as a kid, like to be sudden to have that the person that you're most close to kind of disappear on you. And I think that catalyzed my curiosity a lot. Like I found myself drawn to reading about and a lot of like cataclysmic things. I was reading about like ancient collapse of civilizations and like earthquakes and the dinosaurs and meteors and I it's interesting to me now to have this additional layer of complexity about inquiry. And I mean, I think I would have been, so you can't know the counterfactuals, right? So if I wasn't raised by a helper, would that mean I wouldn't be interested in reading books?
Sure.
I don't think it's that black and white. It's probably just additional factors. But it's so interesting and strange that I'm 32 years old this year. And I mean, I knew details about like my early childhood all my life, but I only just kind of pieced it together and suddenly a lot of things made more sense. But yeah, so I've always been obsessed with understanding like civilizational collapse and I guess I would describe it as like getting rug pulled, right? Like so having your social reality kind of pulled out from underneath you. So one of the things that I'm Singaporean, and in like World War II, Singapore was occupied by the Japanese. And I never understood when I was a kid how come I seemed so troubled by it, but my peers weren't. Like my friends were like, oh yeah, whatever, it's history. It's not a big deal. Like who cares? It's just facts and figures. And I'm like, no, like it's life. Like everything that we know can be changed in an instant. Isn't that shocking? Isn't that horrifying? And they're like, let's go recess, And but yeah, so now through this narrative of I had endured something that was like a rug pull of my own when I was very young. And since then, I guess I've been extra sensitive to how that plays out in other domains. And yeah, so I've always wanted to understand people. I've always wanted to understand how things work, what's going on in the world. Like I always wanted things to make sense.
Right.
And yeah, so I've just always been, and I guess I've also always wanted a sense of belonging. So I love my
Mhm.
parents. It's not like I was from like an abusive childhood or whatever, but like we were always kind of distant. We didn't really get along super well, and so I was always hungry for like community with fellow nerds, and like I'm a minority where I'm from, and I was very drawn to like forum culture, like video game forum stuff, and yeah, so I've just always had that part of me be active as long as I can remember. And so
Yeah.
I, I spend so much time on internet forums in retrospect that these days sometimes when somebody asks me something like, "Oh, how do I get good at like posting?"
Oh, right.
I can give some advice, but like to be perfectly honest, there's like no substitute for just putting in the hours for years and years. And like I wonder if it's a bit
Yeah.
dishonest to even offer any suggestions if they don't have that kind of background. But then
Mm.
again, I'm thinking like, so I was watching a fitness influencer on YouTube, and she's like super flexible. And I'm like,
Okay.
how do you get that flexible? And like when
Right.
she was a child, she was like a gymnast at like 3 or something. And then she stopped as a teenager. But then, there's some things that if you pick it up from a very, very young age, you just kind of have that, the
100%.
muscle memory or whatever.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm never gonna be as flexible as her, like ever. I can try my best, but like she will always be ahead of me because she has that background and she's continuing to work on it. But
Hmm.
that's fine, like everybody specializes in different things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So wait, so before we get, because that's an interesting kind of thing. How do you kind of deal with running up against that reality?
Mhm.
Because I think that is a very interesting thing of like growth and maturity, et cetera, is
Mhm.
because when I was growing up, the biggest thing that was always like pushed into me is, specialize, be interested in one thing. And I always thought that that was so one dimensional, so narrow.
Yeah.
And I was always kind of into complexity and all these other things. But how do you kind of deal with that reality? Before let's get deep right into it. I mean, we'll talk about books, we'll talk about the internet, but how do you deal with the reality of kind of understanding who you are as a
Mhm.
person within society, within history, with relationships? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So I mean, I read a lot very early on, and so I got exposed to a lot of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And even just being raised in Singapore is like a very diverse, just many different religions, many different ethnicities,
Mm-hmm.
different just being in between East and West, you just kind of always see multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And like, growing up watching stuff on TV, it's like you watch a little bit like anime, and then there'll be like Hollywood movies and like Bollywood movies. Like you just see all kinds of different
Wow.
things. And I mean, that was always just very natural for me. I didn't even think of it as anything unusual or special until I encountered people who were like raised in quote unquote monocultures.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I think about all of that? It's like, well, so in my reading, I found that there are many different ways that people have succeeded at many different domains. So I never bought into the idea that, oh, there's like one answer for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
obvious that different people have different specializations. Like there are some people who, they are very precise and methodical about how they do something, and they get very, very good at that. And then there's some people who are like chaotic all over the place, and then they get very
Yep.
good at that. So it became pretty apparent to me that you should. I mean, so the cliche phrases are things like "much to the beat of your own drum," right? Like, so you should find what your natural inclinations are and what like your instinct is, and lean into that and double down on that. So like even on Twitter, for example, Ayla, for example, she's
Mm-hmm.
excellent at coming up with polls,
You're right.
and I can come up with polls like if I want to, but when I watch someone like her do what she does, I'm like, oh, I will never be able to keep up with that because she must be thinking about polls in her sleep or in the
Right.
shower or whatever, and I have to be like, what would a good poll be? Right. Whereas for me, the things that come very naturally for me is the things that I do. So I quote tweet stuff, I repost, I reshare. And again, sometimes people ask me like, how do I be more like you on that front? And I kind of want to say it like you shouldn't though. I mean, you can try.
You can
I can
try.
tell you can try. I can tell you how I do it, sort of. But like really, the thing that you should figure out is what you are, instinctively like snap judgment quick at, because that's the thing that will be like your competitive advantage or whatever, like the thing that gives you your voice, the thing that makes you. I think there's like a Shakira interview where she said something like she was in a choir and like she got like asked to leave the choir because her voice was too weird. Right? Like you have to sing a
Okay.
certain way to
Yeah,
fit in with the choir, and she just couldn't. And like yeah, everyone ultimately, ends up I mean not everyone. I guess everyone who pursues some kind of public facing or like the way that you are ends up being it comes out in whatever you do anyway. So you might as well support it rather than resist it.
Yeah.
As far as possible.
That's a good point. So I want to give you a quote that you wrote. What magical, intoxicating, mind-altering things books are. Little packages of paper full of ordered squiggles, messages from one mind to another, sometimes across vast distances of time and space. Glorious prose, Visa. Well done. But I will have to ask you a little bit further. Like, I mean, do you remember kind of maybe one book that really stood out to you, maybe growing up? And then what's kind of a book recently that's really, captivated you or ensnared you into its grasp?
I mean, so many. I almost
Right.
yeah. So similarly, when people ask me about books, I'm always like, it's all of them.
Yeah.
Every book,
My entire library.
every book is enriched by every other book that you read,
Sure.
right? Because it's every. But I mean, then people like just answer the question, dude. I'm like, well,
No, we can wax poetically, Visa. We're here for that too.
yeah. I remember there are a few different books that I remember being kind of swept up in. One was The Duck is Rising. It's like a five or six part like fantasy. It's kind of like a young adult fantasy-ish. Sort of like a grimmer. I don't know if I would say it's Harry Potter-esque, but it's like
Okay.
it's that kind of it's like a boy and his friends and they have to like save the world in some way. Like, I can't remember the specifics of the plot. Like they had to collect like circles. It's some kind of like it's like a remix with like King Arthur kind of like there's a Merlin character, but he's actually Merlin, but you don't quite realize it until later on. His name is like Merriman Leon, that kind of thing. So it's very like it's like you're reading it and it kind of feels like it's written in an ordinary life sort of setting, and then it gets mystical halfway. The Golden Compass, that was another book that's kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch though. I feel like when I start listing out like two or three, I'm like, wait, there's like 50 more I have to say because it's all the different books in all the different domains. When I was a teenager, one of my friends lent me this very, very weird book called Satan Burger. Satan Burger, where like Satan is running a burger joint, and it's just super strange. I mean, I think now if you saw it today, it doesn't feel that weird because it's kind of like extremely online absurdist sort of humor. But when I was like 12 or 11 and I read that, I was like, whoa, this is so different than everything else I've ever read. It's so chaotic and crazy. Biographies, and I remember reading Carl Sagan's biography when I was in the military, and I was just so struck by what a meaningful and consequential life he had lived, kind of just impacting other people. And I think that was very one of the direct influences on like Friendly Ambitious Nerd, like the idea of thinking of kind of just being a positive influence about curiosity and sharing of knowledge and all of those things. So there's that. And yeah, I can go on and on. There's so many.
Is there one like right now that you're just kind of maybe working through or just finished recently or something?
Yeah, I'm always reading like multiple. So currently I'm reading Montaigne's essays. That's one. Just classic, solid. You read it and it's like, oh, this guy was writing like 500 years ago, and it sounds so contemporary and better than like. So again, I don't think it diminishes anybody's Substack to say that Montaigne's essays, if they were on Substack today, you'll be like, holy shit, this is the best Substack.
Yeah,
it's so, and like it does. It's just he was so good at tending to the nuances of his experience, and so that's one. Another, I'm also reading Frank. I can't get his last name right. The book's called The Silk Roads.
Is it by
Caponian.
like a historian or something? Because I remember seeing it
It
a
is a
couple years ago.
historian.
Yeah, a big
It's
one.
got a
I have seen that.
gorgeous cover.
Yep,
That's why
yep.
that's
I know exactly what you're
partially
talking
why I bought it. It's like a
about.
purple cover. Peter Frankopan, that's his
Yeah,
name.
there you
Peter
go.
Frankopan.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, so that's and I wouldn't say it's like groundbreakingly shocking, or I mean it's nothing tremendously new, but it's like it's very well laid out. It's got a lot
Hmm.
of interesting detail, and
Hmm.
it's just quite, I think, exhilarating to be brought on a journey by someone who really knows their stuff, and they're guiding you
Hmm.
through it, through like his like, and you think about periods of time, you think about space, right? How things have changed, how things are still the same,
Hmm.
and yeah, so that's been riveting. Another thing that I was reading a while ago, I haven't picked it up again, but Hyperion by Dan Simmons.
Okay.
So that's it's like
Sci-fi,
it's
right?
sci-fi, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the very cool thing is there are like I think 6 or 7 main characters, and they are all on like this plan, like a space road trip together, and they
Okay.
each tell each other their stories. And so I'm only 100 pages in, so I've read like 2.5. So like of each crew, I'm gonna say crew member, although I don't think they're really crew, but like each member of this squad, right? They all don't really know each other, and they all have different backgrounds. And as each of them tells a story of their life, it's a different genre. So the first
Mm.
story is like some religious guy, some explorer or something, and his story follows the path of like a survival log. Like day one, this thing happened. Day two, we found the settlement. Day three, I have horrible diarrhea. Day five, and it's like this suspense mystery. What's going on? He's
Yeah.
found some weird phenomenon, and from his point of view, from his telling of the story, he doesn't know what's happening yet. So you're kind of piecing it together, and
Oh,
then
very cool. Okay.
you finish that. That's like 60, 70 pages, and it's a full kind of self-contained story. And then it's the next guy, then there's a bit of, oh, we had lunch or whatever, we looked at each other, we're going wondering what's going on. And then the second guy starts telling his story, and he was like a soldier, and it's like this is like a space marine kind of historical time travel kind of
Very
tale.
cool.
And it's like, I think all the 6 or 7 stories have like common themes, or like there's some alien element, some time travel thing. I don't know specifics yet, but I am excited to read the rest of it. It feels like, and I found out later on while looking at Wikipedia or something, that apparently this follows the same convention as the Canterbury Tales, which is like an
Oh,
old
okay.
like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Canterbury
Chaucer
Tales.
era
Yep.
thing. Which
Yep.
everyone, like, you've heard of it, but I'm guessing you probably haven't read it. Like
I
most
think
people
like
haven't read it.
I think I've read two of the things in middle school, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
like
it's one of those like, oh, it's a classic and it's old and it's probably boring, but like it's a respected and now I am more curious to read the classic, because I'm
ah,
finding out that Hyperion is kind of like a modern version of that. It's
I
like,
see.
imagine you watch Lion King and then people are like, oh, Lion King, it's like Hamlet but in cartoon lions, and you're like,
Right,
oh,
right,
I
right.
guess I should check out Hamlet now. And then you go and watch Hamlet, you're like, oh, that's the reference here and there. And
Yep,
so that's what I
yep.
mean when I say like every book kind of enriches every other book, because you just appreciate everything so much more when you see the conventions and you see where people got their ideas from and what they're remixing. And a lot of books remix like the Bible, right?
Oh,
And
100%.
ancient mythologies and all those things. So it's like, and I feel like they can't literally quote tweet stuff in books, but they do it by referencing and remixing, and like if you can spot the references, that's like, it's a reward to the people who read, even though it's a completely different book. They're
Right.
like, hey, I noticed that over there.
Well, can
Yeah.
we maybe go more into that? You brought up a great point as remixing, and I know we
Mhm.
share a kind of deep love for those kind of ideas. And for anyone not familiar, there was I'm pretty sure a documentary, what in the
Mhm.
2010s, remix of Manifesto, talking about Girl Talk, the band that basically, or a guy producer that all he uses is really samples from other music. But obviously,
Mhm.
writing of the greats has been a remix. So, like, how do you kind of think about that? What are you maybe trying to remix now? What are some ideas? We don't have to get too deep because obviously we'll kind of get more into the memes and etc. But I mean, how do you think generally about remixing stuff, using others, and what is that famous Picasso quote or something? Good artists like come up with their own stuff. Great artists steal, or something
Mhm.
from others. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's this video on YouTube by Kirby Ferguson, and it's called "Everything Is a Remix."
Ah, okay.
And and watching that video changed my life. It really eliminated like 98% of my creative anxiety. Because the idea is that, so even if you don't believe like the strong form of the thesis, so the strong form of the thesis is like everything is literally a remix. Like you cannot think original thoughts. You only think in remix. Like some people like, that's a bit extreme. I don't think that's entirely true. But then even if you don't believe in the first part, like it's true that everything that you perceive, right, you will think of it in terms of the things that you already know. So even if nobody told you that Alien was pitched and conceived of as Jaws in space, if you had watched Jaws before and then you watch Alien, you'd be like, oh shit, this is kind of like Jaws, even though it's so we interpret reality in terms of stuff we already know. So in that sense, nothing can truly be like inconceivably like nothing can be truly completely original in the sense that its origin is completely divorced from all of human creation. Right. So even if something is like completely different than everything you've seen before, your brain will still be like, oh, it's not like those other things. And so the distance between what you know and how this thing is violating your expectations and assumptions about what a movie is supposed to be like or what a song is supposed to be like, it is a remix in that sense, right? It's like a negative remix. And so once you see it in that way, you realize, oh shit, that means that, and just to kind of go over the basics. So the idea is, all learning begins with imitation, right? Every child learns language by copying what its parents are saying or whatever. And a lot of great creators, they start out doing mimicry of other people. So like the Beatles used to be a cover band, right? Sony used to be a radio repair shop. Like you learn the technical way of doing things by mimicking your predecessors and what came before. And then what you do is as you develop the skill of making the copies, you experiment. You might do it by accident or you might do it on purpose. You make it a bit faster, a bit slower, bigger, smaller, zoom in, zoom out. And like you start to get a sense of all the variables and you have taste. You like, I like this more when it's like that. I like it more when it's like that. And since there's no way to technically make something that isn't derivative, the best we can do is make as interesting mixes as we possibly can. So when we think we're being completely original and avoiding influences, we're just kind of being led by our subconscious influences, and that will be derivative in ways we don't realize. And so you try and write a song and you think that you wrote it yourself, and then like a year later you find out, oh wait, that's very, very similar to like something I heard when I was a kid. So you'll have better odds of coming across as fresh and innovative by deliberately seeking out different material than you normally listen to and kind of exposing yourself to a wider range of influences. And then you try and piece together interesting mixes based on what you like. And yeah, so it's really as simple as follow your nose, like what you like, try and explain to yourself why you like what you like argue with yourself about it, argue with your friends about it, like, no, this is good because of that. And they're like, well, I feel that it's a bit too slow, I feel that it's a bit too XYZ. And the more rigorous you are about this process and the more prolific you are in making stuff and examining the stuff that you've made to see what you like and what you don't like, you just kind of iterate on that process long enough. And like if you do this for like 30 years, people start calling you a genius because you've been through all the iterations and you know what's fresh and what's not.
Yeah.
It's just like, I find it so exciting. Like it's actually so simple, right? You just need to repeat it.
Well, and then also I think I've taken some other things from you, like broadening your time horizon, lengthening it in terms of like, okay, well, are you really playing a long game? What are you really kind of wanting out of this? And that kind of segues into a nice thing that I wanted to talk to you about that I don't think I've heard you talk about it enough times that I know that I want to talk to you about it, but I haven't heard really answers. So hopefully this is a good time to ask, is how do you kind of ground yourself with your life and stuff? Because you are prolific on Twitter and have kind of this notoriety and et cetera. But then as well, like you talk about how important your wife is and how you meeting her in a time of life, maybe most people wouldn't have, settled down or whatever word you want to call it, phrase. But like, how do you kind of, stay grounded at home? How does your wife keep you grounded and not like, okay, this internet celebrity Visa is here all the time, And so I'm trying to see like, how do you ground yourself? How do you really, think about that when you're off Twitter, even though I know it's not all the time or, et cetera. But what are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, I guess I would start by saying that I don't think I'm a very well-grounded person. I try to be,
Okay.
but I don't. I would kind of set expectations by like I can't remember who it was who said like some creative. I think I mean obviously as a creative, but
Obviously.
maybe at this point I'm like making it up in my head. But like I have this mental image of a creative. Maybe it's a musician or an author or some, and someone's like I don't know why people expect me to be like exciting and interesting in interviews. Like my work is the most exciting and interesting thing about me. And the rest of the I'm just sitting at home with my like pen and paper. Oh, I think Slash from Guns N' Roses, the guitarist, he's
Oh,
like,
yeah,
"Oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people are asking him like what's your morning routine?" He's like, "I don't know, I wake up, I have coffee, I take a shit, like play guitar a little." Like there's like people seem to expect that, oh, like and there's this great essay by Daniel Chambliss. It's titled "The Mundanity of Excellence," and his
Okay.
research was on like swimmers, like people who so he would study swimmers from like state level, national level, Olympic, and like his findings were like it's just very boring. Like people just wake up early in the morning to go swimming every day, and it's like there's nothing.
Discipline or
There's
something.
no yeah. There's it's discipline. Yeah, and they actually enjoy swimming, right? So again, like
Right,
this goes back to
right.
us saying like with Ayla's pose or whatever, right? Like they find the thing that they like and they just do it, and they do and like the better ones get mindful about it, and they have like these stepwise qualitative improvements. So that's the interesting part. But almost like the dog that didn't bark sort of interestingness is that there's nothing like exceptionally strangely deviant about them. They just the work is the thing that they do. So
Hmm.
similarly for me, it's like, yeah, I write a lot. I space out. Like I'll be sitting on my sofa and just staring into space and like I guess I'm sort of writing in my head. Like I'm just kind of
Hmm.
juggling ideas and stuff. And yeah, it's not that exciting. I mean, it's exciting to me, but it's not exciting to watch. It's like,
Right.
regarding grounding in like personal, like, so my wife knows who she married. She knows me from a young age. She knows that I'm this very head in the clouds kind of abstract dreamer. Um, it is a bit of a I don't know if I would say it's an strange quirk that we ended up together so early and so young and we
Hmm.
married so young
Right.
because part of it was like, well, we had good chemistry from a young age, I guess. We did separate for a while when we were teenagers, which is like, and then it's like very normal teenage thing to
Yep.
do. But then we got back together a couple of years later, and like her parents didn't approve of our relationship, and neither of us thought that was cool. So we are both strangely stubborn in that way. Like it's fun. It's funny. It's almost like I think there's a Oogway quote from Kung Fu Panda,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah,
he's like one often meets their destiny on the path they take to avoid it, right? So it's like her parents didn't want us to be together because we were young and we were like different ethnicities and all that, and if they had not disapproved, we might have just run our course and like eventually you have some squabble and be like, you know what, it's not working out. Bye. But like her parents' disapproval, I think, made us want to like make it work somehow. So I think we were much more um motivated to make our relationship work, which I think is not as common as again, I don't know, I don't want to be prescriptive about this, but I would say that we are happy.
yeah. Hmm.
And it does seem again, I want to be very careful with this because different people's relationships are so different and they all need to hear different things based on what they're going through. But like broad at the broadest level, it does feel like a lot of people get swept up in like there's so many options. And so like if the person I'm
Uh-huh.
currently dating doesn't seem great, like maybe we're not the right fit. Maybe we don't have amazing chemistry, therefore like there's someone better for me. And again, like I repeatedly seem to get benefits from having read so widely as a kid. And even like as a teenager, I was reading all these like advice columns. I'd go to libraries and read magazines and tons of magazines. And on Reddit, I read all these relationship and I'm like, dude, like no one is like ecstatically happy all the time. Like everyone has issues in their relationships and everyone struggles.
Yep.
So I was pretty early on kind of disabused of the notion that like relationships will ever feel like constant paradise,
Mm-hmm.
right? So as long as like you can fight well together and you trust and respect each other to like be fair to each other, and you can apologize for your mistakes, like if that kind of foundation, then I do believe that like that's all you really need, and it compounds over time, right? And this actually ties a bit to something else we were talking about earlier, but like I can't remember which author said this, but they said something like, if you go on 100 first dates with different people, like for a while it seems like you're meeting new people, but after a while you're having the same experience over and over again, which is the first date with another person. You're introducing yourself again, you're having that early flutter of excitement again, which is nice. But like, you do that indefinitely, and it's like you're actually just repeating the thing. Whereas some people think, oh, being married is like you're with the same person every day for the rest of your life. You should get bored. But no, because the second date and the 50th date and the 100th date and the 1000th date, they're all different. You're different people each time. And you have all this like shared depth and experience. And it's the same for, I guess I was going to relate that back to when you were asking like, how do you focus or what do you do? Like, if you try a day one of a new hobby every day and I would say it's worth doing for like a year, maybe if you're a teenager or in your early 20s, or if you've never done it before and you're 30, like, okay, like if you've never tried stuff, like spend some time trying a bunch of stuff, just because, maybe you try music and it's not for you, then you try rock climbing and holy shit, rock climbing feels amazing. Okay, that's great. And you know something about yourself. But once you've tried like 100 things, like you're probably not going to find something that's like way like 100 times more exciting than one of the 100 things you've already tried. So at that point, it's probably wiser to just pick whichever thing you enjoyed the most, or maybe you do like okay, I enjoyed these 5 things the most, and of these 5 things, like this one seems the most like the scene is exciting and interesting, or I like the people, and like you do a bit of thinking about that, and then you just like you commit to it at least for a few years, right? And you will experience things several years into a commitment that you cannot experience from repeatedly doing a day one here and there, right?
Good point.
And I guess, yeah, so that's a bit of the long game thinking. It's a bit of what grounding means to me, I guess. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of privileged in the sense that I really read so much as a child that I really, and it feels like a privilege now, but at the time, I guess it made me weird, and it made me kind of depressed and like overburdened with really, I was just thinking, all civilizations. I was like 12, right? And I'm like, all civilizations collapse. Nothing, the sun is gonna swallow the earth.
Yeah,
and like
that was my big one,
right? Like, holy shit! Like, oh god. And then you kind of be shaken and stirred, like just messed up by that for a while. But eventually you come back down to earth and you're like, well, friendship is still beautiful, music is still beautiful, and you kind of learn to breathe again. And then you find that, oh, having been through that kind of shakeup, and then you start to notice who are the people who haven't had that experience yet. And like you have to be a bit more like careful with them in a way, because they're still kind of clinging on to something. And you notice the people who have kind of broken themselves down and rebuilt themselves from scratch. They have like a lightness to them, and it's glorious when you meet someone else like that and you can just connect straight away. And yeah, that wasn't directly an answer, but I feel like
I think that's great. That's good. That's good. Well, so if we move on to kind of your prolificness on the Twitter sphere, one of your most famous things is your 2 memes that you've made that were very, very poignant, very simple. There's one, and we'll put this up on somewhere visually so people can see. But just the first one is there's like a ship in a cove, if you will, and the waves are going crazy, and there's a whirlpool to the left, and it says life is devastatingly meaningless, and then to the right there's a dragon hydra, life is excruciatingly meaningful, and then there's a ship in the middle, laugh my ass off. So talk us through that. How did that even come up? And then I think that you were briefly talking about that dichotomy, going back and forth, but a lot of people ping pong between them rather than threading the needle in between them. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and ping ponging isn't necessarily bad, but okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. There are a few poems. So this meme is like many, many years in the making. Like I've had
Hmm.
many prior thoughts. One is a poem by Kobayashi Isa. It
Okay.
says, in this world, we walk on the roof of hell, gazing at flowers. And that's always stuck with me as a
Whoa.
very beautiful, sad, just that there's the tension between, like difficult and yeah. So that's just one thing that's always stuck with me. Another one which is closer to the meme is this one's, but I can never get his name right. Nisargadatta. His quote says, love tells me that I am everything. Wisdom tells me that I'm nothing. And between these two banks flow the river of my life.
Wow.
And
Wow. Okay.
right, I have so many of these. It's
Deep.
not mine. It's
Profound.
yeah, it's other people came up with this stuff, but I've just been reading so much. I just keep track of the good ones, right? And then someone showed me another one that I didn't know about. I think this was after I made the meme, but like someone showed me there's like a old ancient like Jewish proverb, something like in one pocket you should have a thing that says I am a nobody, and something similar to that. Like in one pocket it's like I must forgive everyone, and then in another pocket you must have I must be uncompromising, something like that. And then he said,
Uh-huh.
wisdom is knowing which pocket to reach into for which circumstance. I'm like, oh man, it's all the same thing, right? And like, you take like yin yang, the Taoist
Uh-huh.
symbol, and say,
Hmm.
oh, in darkness there's light, in light there's darkness, and exhale, inhale, everything in cycles. And what else? There's one more. There's and at some point I was during one of my earlier existential crises. I was rereading like Albert Camus. I can never get
Yeah.
his name. Camus, yeah, and I was reading Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus,
Yep.
and I in retrospect, I now suspect that I didn't. I kind of misread it a little bit, but like I read it as like we must, so even the sentence one must imagine Sisyphus happy,
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
what the word must can be read several different ways, right? Like one is like um we must, as in like we should, meaning he is already happy and that's just how we see it. Like, and the other one is for our own sake we must like project onto him the idea
Hmm.
that he should be happy, because if he's not happy then
Right.
that's messed up, right? So there's
Right.
there's like two ways of interpreting it, and I didn't quite see both meanings initially. I initially interpreted it as, oh, Camus is kind of doing like this cop out and being like this. So I think recently somebody went viral for her interpretation, which is that you must imagine Sisyphus like kind of like enjoying having a daily routine and whatnot. And
Okay.
it's I don't think it's a bad interpretation. Like if I mean if it works for you and it makes you feel better going about your life, like great, right? Um, but like when I was reading that, I think I was quite depressed, and I'm like, that seems unrealistic. It seems kind of not unrealistic, but it seems kind of like you're bargaining with the universe, right? Like you're kind of
Mm.
trying to persuade yourself that there is meaning when there is none, something like that. And what kind of so I thought about it a bunch of ways, and I thought about a bunch of other things I had read and seen, and I was very much sold on this idea of like absurd humor, and the sense that like life is a joke, literally. And there's
Hmm.
this great essay by, I can't remember his name, but like it's about um Wiley E. Coyote and
Okay.
Roadrunner,
Yeah. Yeah.
and about how like in a way we are like Wiley E. Coyote, because like the humor of the show is that the Roadrunner will break the rules of the universe. So it'll be things like he'll paint
Right.
a thing on the wall, like a fake road, and then he expects the Roadrunner to crash into the rock. But somehow the Roadrunner gets to break the laws of that universe and run
Yeah.
into the road. And then Wiley's like, "Oh shit! I seem to have a magic paintbrush or something. I'm gonna." And then he runs and he crashes into the stone. And like it's absurd, it's unfair, and it's funny, and we laugh, right? And
Yeah.
and the essayist is like, that's life. Life is unfair. It makes no sense. The beautiful phrase was your expectations are the setup. like what you think is going to happen. You think you're going to be happy, or you think you're going to have success, or you think whatever it is that you think life is going to be like. That's the setup. And then reality, actual reality, when it bangs you in the face, that's the punchline. And so your life is a joke. And I was like, oh man, that's so, it's like deep, it's like meditative. It's like, oh fuck, like all the things that I have despaired about and been disappointed about. There is kind of a humor in it. It's funny because I thought it was gonna go another way, right? And then when you can see the humor in that, and if you can actually find a way to laugh. And the thing is, no one else can. If someone else is laughing at you about it, that's not cool, right? Like then you just feel like you're getting mocked. But if you can find the humor in it within yourself, and you're able to laugh from within yourself, there's a sovereignty in that. And so that's when I wrote a essay titled "One Must Imagine Sisyphus Lolling," LOLING.
Oh.
Like, and so like he's like pushing the thing up, the thing is, it's fucking stupid. Oh my god, it's lame. Like whatever it is, but he sees the humor. He is Wile E. Coyote. We are all Wile E. Coyote in life. And so I had this sense of, when you are in a horrible situation, try to find the humor in it. Like, again, I can't prescribe that to somebody else. Like, if someone's mom just died, I'm not going to be like, hey, isn't that kind of funny? Like, no, that's me being an asshole. But what I try to do for myself is, when I can find the humor in something, then there is release, and anytime there's a contradiction, right? So, and I think that was a tweet that preceded the meme. So I was like, when there are two seemingly contradictory things, there's usually some overlap in which the tension is funny. And if you can find a way to laugh, then there's a freedom in embodying it. And yeah, so like in a practical everyday sense, it's like, my best writing happens when I have like pure creative freedom and no stress and no demands on my life. But I have bills to pay, and I got to ship this by tomorrow. And then there's that. Well, that's unfair, but that's life, And if I can find the humor in it, like, and like something like, I think when I was working on my second book, I'm like, oh yeah, I have a year to condense all of human psychology in a book, right? Which is like, that's not possible. And like the impossibility of the challenge, it can either stress you out and grind you down, or you can laugh, see that it's not actually possible. And then in that humor, in the moment of laughter, you can sometimes get a flash of insight, and it's like, well, it's not actually condensing everything, but it's a valiant attempt. And you can see that I'm like blazing it, right? Ray Bradbury has some quotes about how every great poet, every great author, like at some level, when you're reading it, you feel like they are vibing that they are gonna live forever. Even though we all know that no human lives forever. But in that moment, like, holy shit, that guy is in the zone, he's flowing, he's embraced eternity in that moment. And so that's kind of what and so like for me, that's what like A. Lamau is. It's like you really see the humor of being human, being a finite being in an infinite existence, right? Or infinite possibility, and how unfair it is, but how funny that we are the ones subjected to that. And if you can laugh while you are in the struggle between cosmic challenges, then that's the path of like freedom and peace and joy, hopefully. Well, and so I mean, devastatingly meaningless is just collapse of all meaning. Like, what's the point of anything? Blah blah blah. Excruciatingly meaningful is like, oh my god, everything I do has consequences, and like like I can help people. And like you then get worked up about that. It's like, oh, everything I write is so important, and then if it's so important, then you freeze, and then there's the thing in that. And so in both cases, there's a humor to it.
Yeah, well, it seems like that meme is a lot more descriptive, and then your next meme, the domino meme, is much more prescriptive. So it basically, and I will put it on the screen, but the lowest domino, and then they get progressively bigger, and then you basically put just little lines on each domino. So it goes love and curiosity, friendly, ambitious nerds, high trust and high openness, scene of exploration, nourishing and supportive medicines, shift in global consciousness, golden age of humanity. So you went all in. I love it, but also it's a little bit more prescriptive than descriptive. So can you kind of tell me about your thought process on kind of coming up with that, but then also linking them towards whatever a golden age of humanity is in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that they're both aspirational in a sense.
Okay, good point.
But so some background context to the Domino's meme. the Domino's meme was actually like the second Domino's meme I made that day. So earlier that day, I had done like the sad ending version of it. So the sad ending version of it was like uh trauma and abuse, or someone goes through some difficult scenario, and then they don't know, they have not processed that trauma or whatever, so they're needy and they inflict that pain on other people. And then there is like a anti, I gotta look it up, but it's like the anti asshole defense system, or like, you know, just some kind of social norm to kind of to stop bad behaviors, but then it's like wrongfully implemented. So once you have a wrongfully implemented attempt to stifle bad outcomes, you just stifle everything, right? And it's because everyone's like afraid of saying anything wrong, or, you know, doing anything hurtful. And so then you have like intellectual stagnation and like cultural stagnation. Like people are just afraid to say anything and they're not curious anymore. And then it's like just bleak ending of like the world sucks now because, you know, some bad shit happened, somebody else retaliated in a bad way. There's this back and forth of badness and suppression and pain and sad. And I looked at it and I'm like, that looks depressing as hell. Like I need to draw the, like, sing the counter melody to that, you know. So like, so both, it's a tale of two cities, right? So like, and we all see how things get worse, but I think people might not see so immediately how things can get better. And so friendly, at that point I had already written Friendly Ambitious Nerds, the book, and but I had not yet like that was my first, I think, elegant articulation of how things get better. And I think it was very much meant to be like the opposite of a downward spiral. So when you see the downward spiral from how, you know, kind of people feel isolated and alone and scared, and then they are suspicious of each other, and then blah blah blah. So I'm like, hey, what's the opposite of that? So like, you have to have curiosity and love, and then you have to have people embodying it. You have to have people sharing it with each other, which is like trade, specialization. And then, I mean, like the later Dominoes, I was just just enjoying the, like, I don't seriously, I have not yet like thought in a lot of detail about what I even mean by shift in global consciousness. I can improvise what I think I mean by it, but like it doesn't, I'm not like fixated on that. So like right now, if you read like I have like a public document of my current state of thinking, and I'm just like, how do I find 1,000, you know, like so the phrase I use is mint 1,000 Erasmuses. Erasmus was, I would say, a friendly ambitious nerd in the 1500s who was like just very prolific, wrote letters to everybody. It was kind of everybody's mutual, you know, kind of like encouraging people to be like more effective. And like those people who were doing that, sending letters back and forth, they were kind of they were like a staging ground for the thinking that would become like the post-empire, post like religious authority society. They were in the process of reimagining what like it would, like, you know. So they before we had like nation states, basically, like nation states might not have been born in their present state without a bunch of dudes writing, basically emailing each other back and forth about philosophy and you know, how should life be lived, you know, are we just like secularism, humanism, all those things. Like they were thinking out loud about that stuff. And you know, it really is striking to me when you look back at human history. You're tempted to think that if you don't look too closely, you're tempted to think that progress is kind of slow and steady all the time. But when you zoom in closer and closer, it's like it's very lumpy. It's like a lot of progress happens in a very small amount of time and space because like a cluster of individuals were unusually kind of high agency, like just very potent. And like most of human history benefits from the incredible output of a remarkably small number of people throughout history. And you know, ideally we would expand that number of people. I think we have, you know. It's an interesting thing is you know, a thing that I didn't even stop to ask while daydreaming about a golden age is whether we might already be in it. And I'm starting to consider the possibility, like, just so like to consider that thesis, I would be like, I submit Twitter, Wikipedia, YouTube, like all of those things. And again, there's horrible shit in each of those things as well.
Sure.
But if you were to just isolate the learning stuff, the
Definitely.
history, the how to do stuff, and you presented all of that to like Da Vinci and Emerson and Montaigne, they would be wow.
Yeah.
Like so, and also if you read like Da Vinci did not think he was living in a Renaissance while he was living in it. It's really in retrospect there are like historians and like Vasari was writing about they glorify the past basically, but in the moment you're just like, oh, you don't wake up and think, what a nice day it is to live in the golden age of whatever, right? You go to work, you meet your friends, you do what you can. And so it's possible that we might be kind of living in it now and we just don't perceive it, in which case the work actually gets simpler because it just means that we need to help people appreciate what we already have, and that's actually it's more important than people might think it is, and it's more valuable than people might think it is because it's really just like and it's funny because people generally want better lives, but the idea that you could have a better life without actually changing anything like dramatically, but just by changing your perspective such that you appreciate your existing life more, it seems like cheating. But if it feels legit, it can change your disposition, it can change your attitude, and then other people feel that, and then your social relationships get better, and then like it's a kind of manifestation. It really does work. And so I see that as part of my work. I also think about how like apparently when when the Wright brothers made their first flight, and again I think like 10 years before a few years before their first flight, people were like, oh, it's not going to happen in like 1,000 years.
Oh,
and they
right.
did it
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after they did it, it still took like 5+ years before like they flew and landed and the news was reported and nobody really cared for like 5-6 years. Like it's just like, oh, whatever. And same for when Alexander Fleming presented penicillin to his peers, like other doctors and whatever.
Oh, wow.
He literally he dropped. I have to make like a video or something about this. Like if you read, like he literally, so he says like, here's my presentation. This thing that I've done, it like kills I can never get it right. It kills. So how I store that information in my head is I have punched pestilence in the dick for all of mankind. Like up until like, so Montaigne died of like a tongue infection that nobody dies from because you just go to the doctor. He was like one of the wealthiest guys of his time, and he died like 20-30 years earlier than he should have because of like a virus, like a thing that today we cure with antibiotics and we don't even think about it. You go to the doctor, you're done. And like he gave that to the world, and like nobody asked him any questions. He's like, any question, like, here's my findings, anybody got anything to ask? And they're like, no, I don't know. No, it's like, and so it really drove in for me that everyone recognizes good ideas, where a good idea is something that is kind of a good version of what you're familiar with. But when you have a great idea, something that really advances things like a decade, no one knows what the fuck to think. They're like, what did we just see? That makes no sense. And so they can't. And the thing is, a great idea and a shit idea get the same response, right? So you like, if you have a great idea, you don't actually really know. It's like you hope that it's great, but you can't actually get like immediate feedback. It's like time will tell, or posterity will tell.
Right.
But I mean, so I bring up all of that in the sense that it made me realize that there must already be penicillins and man flight and what, like, innovation is not the bottleneck to adoption of great ideas by humanity. And so that's why I work in marketing. That's why I work in storytelling, and because like there's already innovation happening and it's not being recognized, right? I have friends who are passionate about innovation and like advancing science, and I respect that. And again, I think each of us should do what we feel inclined in our hearts to do. And I'm like, I bet there's someone out there who needs this kind of help, and they'll, so that's that. Yeah, I went on a this is about golden age stuff and
Well, here I'll continue. So Alex Kennedy on Twitter, he basically asked, where are we on that domino right now? And then I think you kind of started to play around in this. Is when do you predict we'll all look around and be like, "Yep, this is a renaissance, all right." So I think we already went over that. That in the moment you probably won't be realizing it, but then where are we really?
There are some signs though. So I do feel like again, it's the satisfying thing about the dominoes meme is that it implies a very linear, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's a very kind of satisfying one by one thing. In practice, it's a bit more nebulous. It's like gas, right? Like so I think in our sphere of like Twitter and whatever, like we've kind of solved for love and curiosity as like norms and the way people have conversations with each other. But it's not 24/7. Like sometimes people get mean, sometimes people get, so it's like it's not perfect, but it's there more than not. And I would say again, like friendly ambitious nerds, like we have a few dozen of us, I would say, like who are like kind of active and in network with each other. And every time I think somebody in this network interfaces with somebody else in that network and they hire them as a client, or they like they find some way to work together, or they go to a meetup together, or they date, maybe get married, right? There's all these possible interactions, and every time I would say, so I describe them as friendly ambitious nerds, but this is my language, so I don't want to impose my language on everybody else. But like anytime one of these good people finds another one of these good people and increases their social graph of that kind of good person, and they have a positive interaction, to them that's a fraction of, wow, this feels amazing, this feels so like people who do a meetup, go to vibe camp or whatever, they're surrounded by other people and like, wow, this feels like magic. So that's a flavor of what the golden age is like. And the greatest end goal is we want everyone who wants that feeling to be able to have it. And we are in the process of like getting better at doing it ourselves, getting better at teaching it to other people, sharing it with one another. And yeah, so I would say in some ways for myself, in my personal life, relative to what my life was like beforehand, I'm already in it sort of for myself. Like I'm already in that journey, or in that vortex, however you want to put it. There's more to do, there's more people to help, there's more I think when I cross some threshold of financial independence, that will feel like a certain kind of paradise. So I can really, I wake up. So it used to be one day I used to dream while I was going to work. One day I'll be able to make a living by writing, just writing stuff that I think is, no, I mean, so I guess when I was in school, I want to make a living as writing. And then so I got a job where I was writing in marketing. And, it was stuff that I liked my colleagues, I liked my work, but if I'm honest, it's not like I want to spend my days writing about marketing every day. Like I do find it interesting, but it was a profession, but it was not like a vocation. But so when I'm going to work, I'm like, well, I'm good at this and I like it, but like I dream of one day not needing to write about only marketing. Like I can write about whatever I like. And so then I wrote a couple of books that are largely about what I like. And it's like, well, now I'm living that dream, right? And I get the dream keeps expanding, right? It's like, well, one day I'll be able to write like frivolous nonsense, right? And not like, so not even like, like in like just like I still have to think about, well, how am I going to sell ebooks, or how am I going to get patrons, or how am I going to get whatever it is to pay the bills. And each year I get closer and closer to, I don't need to care at all. I can do whatever I want. Like that is a threshold that I look forward to reaching. And then but I can bet that when I'm there, I'll be like, well, I'll have to remind myself to take a moment to really celebrate and take it in. But after that, I would be like, well, now I have enough money to take care of myself, so I should start thinking about how I can help other people. And then how can I help like the people who make the most impact? And then once I have that, I'll be like, how can I help? So there's always a bigger domino. So which is great, right? It's a sense of purpose, sense of continuity. So I always get slightly annoyed when I see people being like, oh, what do I do now that I have like quasi retired after I made my like software? Like help people do it. Like it's so simple. Uh,
So I guess that you kind of started going into my next question. So Chris D or Senseful Ronan
mhm,
asks, what are some essential ingredients for supportive and nourishing scenes? So I know you've done stuff with Intellect. You've also
mhm,
kind of adjacent to this part of Twitter. You've kind of
mhm,
become a quote. I think you called it in your We Were Voyagers piece, a switchboard for earnest nerds. Love it.
mm,
So how do you think about like not just facilitating these kind of scenes, but then also establishing them, iterating, evolving, and then also making them towards the dominoes, supportive and nourishing rather than the first domino
mm,
that you maybe made.
mm. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of variables about what makes good scenes. And when I look at existing scenes, I think there's not enough welcoming of new people. I mean, so again, like
Mm,
this we could do a whole 2 hours on this probably, so I gotta try
right.
and keep it snappy. But yeah, so scenes should be lively. The problem with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
so scenes tend to do well and then they tend to die. And I've always thought that if you want to understand something, find out how it fails, so that like if you want to understand how your car works, one of the fastest ways you can do it is Google like car problems and be like, oh, this thing does, oh, like by reverse engineering how it
Yep.
fails, you get a sense of how to keep it working or healthy, right? And so scenes should be lively, and like everyone wants to participate in a lively scene, but there is a kind of self homeostatic effect that I don't think it's like anybody's fault, but like scenes tend to get kind of insular without any external, without it's just a net, it's almost like a law of physics kind of, and
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
a healthy scene has good people who sort of keep the chemistry, keep the molecules flowing, because otherwise if you end up with like a scene where one person has the highest status and everyone else kind of defers to them, and like there's no way for people to go up except by, even just saying go up is the wrong model. It's no longer a scene, right? It's like a hierarchy, it's like a cult. Whereas you need like liveliness, you need people entering and exiting, you need new people showing up and being encouraged and feeling that new voices are appreciated and respected. That's what keeps it lively. That's part of it. People need to be producing work that is public facing, that is not
Mm.
about the scene, right?
Yep.
So if you follow me on Twitter, so some people call the part of Twitter that we're on, this part of Twitter, teapot. I am very careful not to use the word teapot,
Mm.
not because I think it's a bad word, but because I want to remain welcoming and accessible to new people. Because once you have jargon, then the jargon becomes a thing people centralize
Yep.
around,
Yep.
and then you have insiders and outsiders, and again, there's something intimate and nice about having some insiders, but like it then becomes this kind of group hug, and
Right.
it's
Right.
hard to control those dynamics at scale.
Mm.
So there has to always be people who are like stirring the pot and like welcoming new people and doing that kind of thing. And the work should be, there should be some work that is public facing. So like that's very obvious in like music scenes and art scenes. Like you should be making stuff for the public. Because if you start making insular stuff where most of your scene is the scene discussing the scene, then again that gets
Right.
incestuous, and
Right.
right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I always tell, and I've been kind of invited to a few different communities sometimes. Like I'm like this friendly nomadic switchboard traveling uncle, and I'll get invited to like this meditation heavy group, or this even like effective altruists or whatever,
Yep.
some group of
Yep.
people. And I always tell every group, what you have here is amazing, that you have a group for people to feel at home in. And my wish for you is that you fuck off now and then. You kind of from like get out, and and not just, not because what you have is bad, because it is good, but like you gotta sometimes you gotta leave your hometown to see it for the first time, right? To
100%.
appreciate what you have. And when you go out into the world, you bring back perspective that anybody who's only in that hometown, they don't have that perspective. So it's like, if everyone leaves and comes back, and not all at once necessarily, like,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
you should encourage people to go out into the world, see different things, and that is healthy for the group, it's healthy for the individual. It just makes for livelier scenes, I think. It's, yeah, so no scene should be like everyone here spends all their time here. Again, that's not a scene
Yeah.
anymore, that's a
Yeah.
cult. right?
Yeah.
Like a scene should be, I always think it's like a public park, right? Like people show up after work or they show up with their kids and they kind of participate a little bit and then they move on, and there's that fluidity and flexibility there. Other stuff.
Well, I mean, here's a
I
follow-up with that. Fred Sharman, one of my recent guests, he asked, like, because this goes with this, is how do you resist like bad faith attacks from bad actors when a community is built on maximizing openness? Because I think you kind of started talking about this in self-censorship, those kind of things that happens. Like, how do you, how do you think about, bad faith kind of stuff within a community?
Right. So first thing I would say is I wouldn't say maximize openness. So I do say high openness, but it should, if you try to maximize openness, again, like, so be very cautious be very cautious of trying to max anything. Because trying to max any variable has a way, it's like the Goodhart's law kind of thing, right? Like when you try to overdo one particular, you make one number go up, you will compromise some other thing along the way that spoils
100%.
the whole thing.
Yep.
And so we want high openness, and when you have high openness, there will be bad actors. And what I have learned from my experience and my study and whatnot is that again, so scenes have to be careful not to deny the existence of bad actors, so that's unhealthy. But you also don't want to come down too hard on bad actors in a way that is vindictive, because that's also unhealthy. And it's difficult enough to do by yourself or in a small friend group, and the bigger your scene is, the more there will be these like big waves of percolation. Like, again, it's like if somebody did something bad on the internet, right? Like they cut someone in line or whatever in a video, and then they get like 5,000 people all saying, and maybe none of them says anything horrible, but like 5,000 people just kind of, that's not cool. Like, they don't need to hear it 5,000 times. They can hear it like 5 or 6 times. They're like, okay, I got it.
They get
it. Yeah. So even I have a YouTube video where I'm interviewing a guest, and I'm not, that was like one of the first videos I did with someone else. And there's like a dozen comments saying like, oh, you keep interrupting your guest. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, like it does take
fair point.
Yeah, it's on me. It's on me to learn to metabolize the fact that each new person making that comment thinks that they are the first person to say it, maybe, or they don't notice that there's already 5, 7, 12 other. But yeah, so circling back to bad actors, there's a few different parts to this. One is always center the experience of, well, okay, wait, even before I go there, different scenes and different communities have different cultural norms on how much, not, I don't want to say how much bad actors are tolerated, but like they have different I think usually if someone is revealed to be a bad actor, this person did something bad, we all saw it, that's fucked up. Then you have a kind of a due process. You're like, okay, what you did is bad. We're gonna ask you to not promise not to do that, make some amends, whatever. Like, that's fairly straightforward. If someone does something like criminal, like easy action, if somebody like where it's messy is the gray area where it's not clear what exactly happened. In that domain, I think different scenes and communities have different overlapping norms of what they would want. And even within the same scene, different sections of the scene may sort themselves out by what they think is acceptable and not. And that's okay as well. It's okay for different parts of a scene to, like, you could have one part of the scene being like the most volatile, like, oh, anything goes, you can insult each other all day long, and and that's, I think that's okay. And maybe someone else might think that's not okay. And if they feel that, they can try to change the culture of that part of the scene, or they can cultivate a different section of it, or there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. But yeah, so if we're talking about like someone shows up to a public-ish space and they are being belligerent and mean and nasty to people, if it's possible to get them out, I'm quite pro booting people out of scenes, which some people find that a bit shocking. That I'm quite comfortable like blocking people or like asking people to leave or whatever, because there is this whole worldview which is like, we are all misfits and social outcasts and people have bullied us, and therefore we don't want to bully anybody else. And like we're not going to ask people to leave because that's not cool, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I would say before you ask someone to leave, if it's just like slight social abrasiveness, if they're like being kind of disagreeable in an unpleasant way and people don't like it, like I'll be like, okay, take them aside, talk to them, and be like so DM them if it's online, or if you can bring them aside if it's at a party, like, hey, I gotta tell you something that's kind of awkward and uncomfortable, but let me get it out of the way, okay? The way you're talking, people don't really like that. I don't really like it. I don't think it's cool. And if you keep up with that stuff, like, we're gonna have to ask you to leave, and I would rather not do that. So could you modify your behavior, whatever? That should work a bunch of the time.
Yep.
But if it doesn't work, then yeah, like 2 strikes or whatever, ask them to leave. And the thing is, I've been in multiple like group chats and Facebook groups and whatever where nobody wants to be the bad guy, and
Right.
so when you don't, so this is the kind of ugly thing about community management. If you don't ask the bad guy, the quote unquote bad guys, to leave, and again, like all caveats about whether or not the person is actually bad, blah blah blah, and even just say tedious, like, so like Oscar Wilde said, it's not about whether people are good or bad, it's whether they're charming or tedious. And there's a bit of
I like that.
there's like the gray area there for like bad people who are charming and tolerated, and like that's a separate issue. But like tedious people drive away interesting people. And they don't make an announcement like, I'm leaving because this tedious person is here. They just be like, I guess I'm not gonna, that guy was so annoying, I'm just not gonna show up next time. I got other things, I got like multiple things. They might not even think, oh, I'm gonna stop attending this party or this community or whatever. Because especially the highest value members of your community have other stuff competing for their attention as well. So they'll just kind of casually slide away into the next thing, right? And you won't really notice this happening until one whole layer of like your best people have left, and now the whole place is more tedious and boring, and then it's a race to the bottom, and then the whole thing just kind of dies, and nobody is personally responsible for that failure, right? Or you could say that the community leader or and I would say a scene is broader than, so if it's like one Facebook group or a group chat or whatever, like there's one person who started it, and that's much more clear cut. That person is responsible. But if it's like a wider Twitter scene or whatever, like it's a bit more nebulous, and anybody claiming to be an authority is kind of, so like I don't think I have asserted myself on Twitter. I don't think I think I could, like, so if some shit really went down, and I felt that community norms need to be reasserted for the good of all, I think I could do it. And I think the fact that I haven't done anything like that so far just adds more credibility to if and when I have to do it. It's
okay.
It's like there's this whole quote about how like when the quiet guy gets angry, that's when you fucked up, right? That kind of thing. It's like yeah, so some people like to play like that hall monitor role of telling everybody there's this thing happening in this scene and it's bad. That's another kind of tricky, challenging thing, like publicly talking about how there's supposedly something bad in the scene, and then everyone starts panicking, like, is it me? Is it that guy? Right? And it's like the stuff like that is probably better not done on mainstream public channels.
Yeah.
But if I were, so I don't mind saying it like on a podcast like this for people to consider. But like if I tweeted, you should be careful about how you talk about that. Is like, again, you're perpetuating the same the atmosphere of suspicion and uncertainty. So what I do if I feel like some people are being sus is I change the topic and just, so this goes back to the work, right? So it's like, if it's a music scene, make music. If it's whatever tweeting scene, like post some nerd shit about a book or whatever, like just bring the attention back to, and I'm not saying like deny the other thing, but like
right
so like in relationships, like in like romantic relationships, there's a sense of for every like difficult criticism you give each other, you have to give each other like 5 or 6 compliments or something to feel like it balances out. Because otherwise, if you're just criticizing each other back and forth, even if you're both being completely honest with each other, if it just feels like you're hating on each other every day, like, why are you together? It feels like your relationship is that, right? So And there's another kind of human cycle. Again, like divorces happen more than we would like as a society because people are not natural at this. So you have to actively take the time to compliment people, celebrate good work, right? There's all these hygiene principles about keeping the scene lively, fun, interesting, a joyful place to be, even if bad shit happens. So it's yeah.
So we have two more questions. So next one, I'm going to keep on my STS or Science Technology Studies hat. So that's what I'm going to school for here in grad school in Munich.
Nice.
And it's all about basically the social construction of science and technology, and really, technology is not neutral. It's how people use it. And but then there's also another side of this, or I wouldn't say opposite, but science is the pursuit of fact, and facts don't care about your feelings. That kind of bastardized version of the other side. How do you how do you think about the social aspects of science and technology? Because I mean it's just a question I'm kind of interested in hearing, to be honest with you.
Right. So I mean, I'm not a scientist, right? I'm just a nerd, but I do have an interest in science, and I have an interest in the applications of science. And I have said that so I define a nerd as someone whose behavior is directed by their curiosity. And so all scientists are nerds in my framework because their curiosity is guiding their behavior. And curiosity is past a certain threshold, it becomes dangerous, right? And that's part of why, while everyone in society will pay lip service to it and say, oh yeah, curiosity is great, like most people don't really like. There's a lot of words for putting down curious people, especially in the social domain. It's like in like just busybody. There's a whole bunch of words like that, like just to put down someone who's curious and like meddling in. So like there's the social aspect of meddling in affairs that you shouldn't, and then like in science or in knowledge, like there's that sense of in ancient times it might be like you're meddling with forces you don't understand. You're playing God. You're kind of, and there's that, and then there's I think more straightforwardly, every knowledge is power, right? Every tool is simultaneously a weapon, whether you realize it or not. Like when you make fertilizer, you make TNT, right? When you make whatever it is that you make nuclear reactors, you make nuclear bombs. Like whatever it is that you make that's powerful, power can be used in some other way, right? You make vaccines, you make bioweapons. Like there's always some potential misuse of anything. And I do think that this is hard. So Carl Sagan talked about this, like when they were discussing like nuclear weapons, and they were saying things like nuclear deterrence is too important to be left to the experts alone, right? And yet people who are not experts don't have sufficient. They're not even well informed enough to even know what they're talking about, and so they become susceptible to like demagoguery. Like they have some scaremongering politician tells them that like some X is more dangerous than Y, therefore whatever, and they'll just go with it. So I mean, the ideal beautiful answer would be to just level up the science education of the entire species yesterday if we could, but we don't currently have that, right? So we have to work with you go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had, right? So it's tricky. I do still think that efforts should be made to provide thoughtful, clear, like non-condescending science education for anybody who wants it. Like sometimes, so like I was reading a thing I think it was like, so during COVID, I was reading a thing in like New York Times or something where they were asking kids to wear masks, I think. And there was something like they were coming up with like bullshit explanations for why masking is good, because like it's socially, like the child it's just this very convoluted attempt to try and make it sound like a good thing when it wasn't. And it would have been better to I believe it's so like I think it's better to tell the truth. And even if the truth is like, so the truth is like, okay, kids, teachers, parents, whatever, like here's where we're at. We think that this is the best state of affairs for your health. You don't get to see each other's faces or whatever. That's probably not good for you. We're sorry, right? You might hate us for that later on, but like they're kind of honest And like in Singapore, that's what it's like, so
Right.
I'm kind of blessed in our country. It's like there is that consensus of we will keep you updated on what the situation is and what we think the truth is, and that seems to be harder to do in like more complex media environments or more complex political environments. So I don't want to make like specific comments about those things, but like I mean the general principle there, I guess, is I hope people don't feel compelled to compromise on their values because it seems like other people are also compromising on their values. I feel like I saw something like that very recently that kind of shocked me a little bit, and it's something super trivial. It's like, I hate this. Oh, it's like one of those pick crew Twitter. You post a picture of
sure.
all your people, right? And somebody was like, "Oh, I hate this, but everyone is doing it, so I have to do it." And I'm like, you don't.
No, you don't.
You don't have to, if you actually hate it, don't do it. Like you don't have to do the thing that you hate just because. And so like I feel like it's connected. I feel like so I mean, to answer the direct question of like, do facts care about your feelings or not? I think that science, so I mean I have what I think is a common sense. To me, I feel like it's a common sense thing, which is like, well, if we're talking about like chemical formulas and like those very material based things, it's pretty straightforward that I guess different, like I've seen something where people say things like, oh, some kinds of math is racist, and I'm like, I don't buy that. I don't see how that could be. If someone I knew felt strongly about it, I would be curious to hear them out, like what they probably mean something a bit more subtle, and like they're just using that phrase. Like maybe it's like, oh, some math department in some whatever has like internal politics. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's why it's not like X plus MY is okay, sure. Right. So
sure.
in that case, I think it's very straightforward. But when we talk about things like, I don't know, energy policy or something, and again, I'm not qualified to comment on energy policy, but yeah. I don't know, what was your question again exactly?
No, I know. I mean, it was more like the social construction of science and tech, but it's all good. I mean, I think you went around kind of how to think about that, and I think that's what's more important. I know we're almost at time, so last question. I asked this to basically all my guests. As you can see behind me, this is the Earth and the stars and everything, and there's a big kind of thought process. That astronauts and people that have gone to space and the moon experience this thing called the overview effect.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm doing some own research into that, which is very interesting, and rethinking it in other ways. And there's some super interesting things, like there was in the research literature in astrobiology about the break off phenomenon. So people go up and then they feel like they're breaking off from the Earth, not being more a part of it, et cetera. So there's a lot going on, and there's more narratives, but I want to keep it in this, and that, like, well, do you have you thought about that? Have you thought about being in space and looking down, and then what are kind of the thoughts that are going through your mind? Do you want to say something? Some people have said they want to just probably read some Rilke, poetry or something. Other people said it'd be too much and they just wouldn't do anything. Other people had grandiose kind of ideas. So what's your thought process?
Yeah, I fell in love with the idea when I first heard about it around like 2012, 2013. It was in fact at some point like one of my main motivations in life, I would say, was let's get commercially viable space tourism possible as soon as possible, and balloons or whatever. Just send as many people up to see it. Send all the world leaders, right? Get everyone to see. As there's that Edgar Mitchell quote, right? Like about
100%.
Out there, you want to drag a politician by the. Yeah, like I was very obsessed with trying to do that. And so when I say phrases like shift in global consciousness, that was kind of part. I think Neil Tyson had a quote about how again, when we went to the moon and we took the photo of Earthrise and we saw that image of like the continents without borders, and then from there you get concepts like Doctors Without Borders. So there was being able to behold the Earth as a whole without the maps and all that, like expanded human consciousness a certain way. And getting more people up there, I think, would make a difference. Going to Mars, I believe, would make a difference in a way that nobody is correctly estimating. Like it's an ontological shift in a way that changes the felt sense. Anyway, I want to go. I want to have like a glass of whiskey. FaceTime my mom if it works. And just yeah, it just it's I anticipate that it would be a spiritual experience for the better. Like so, I know William Shatner went up with Bezos and whatever,
Exactly.
and his experience was pretty sad, right? Like
Yep.
it seems like a drug trip, basically. If you read about what people's trip reports on psychedelics,
Yep.
some
Yep.
people have the time of their lives, some people have a very bad trip. And I feel that a bad trip is not necessarily a bad thing. I
No,
think it
agreed.
might be a bad experience in the moment, but it's unpleasant because you're facing unpleasant things within yourself. You're coming to terms with who you are, and there are things about yourself that in going away from the earth, you realize, oh God, like when I'm away from my friends and my like phone and my
Uh-huh.
money and all the things that I care about, I feel so disconnected and alone and what have I done. Whereas on the other hand, there's this book about sea power by a retired Navy admiral, and he says he's a poet. He's like an admiral who's a poet. It's amazing. He talks about how when you're out at deep sea in the ocean, right, like away from you can't see land anywhere, and it's like at night and you see the stars, and you're like,
Oh God,
I'm
yeah.
away from land, I'm away from Earth, I'm away from anyone, that I can like. It's just me and my crewmates, but as we navigate by the stars, we are on the same path that every sailor in the history of mankind for thousands of years. We have all looked at the same night sky. We all looked at the same moon and felt the same, a bit of yearning, a bit of just again, I can't describe it because I've never been alone with that kind of crew at sea at night. But like he was, I think, having something of maybe not as profound as the overview effect, but you can see the
Yeah.
similarities, right? Like the sense of um and it got earlier we were talking about how you got to leave home to find out, to go back and see where you're at, right? Like you see your hometown for the first time, you see yourself for the first time when you're away from everything. And yeah, so maybe some people like you can tell they probably shouldn't go on that trip because they're not ready for that deconstruction that's going to happen, because it is like I've read a whole bunch of those quotes, right? Like you see the infinite blackness of space and you realize, oh shit, it's like Earth is so fragile and fleeting, and beyond that is nothing, and
Yeah.
it looks like nothing. And for some people that's terrifying, and for some people it really makes you appreciate what you have. And same for like read reports of people like scuba diving. There's all this micro dosage of the overview effect. Right? You go scuba diving, I remember when I tried to go scuba diving. I didn't have a great experience because I can't swim, and I can't like I tried to go further than I could have. But again, while it was slightly jarring, I liked it. I liked the experience. Like maybe I'm weird, but I liked the experience of being underwater for a while with a tank. And like if the tank didn't work, I would not have been able to support myself, my life. I would have died, right? And like I went out on a boat there's a ship crew, like a captain or whatever,
Oh, okay.
and we didn't know each other personally, but like my life was in his hands as we were out at sea. Because like if the ship capsized or something, like I don't know how long it'd have taken. Like there's no phone reception, you're out at
Right.
sea, and like right. And I found that to be a very intimate and life affirming experience, to be
Mm.
carried out into danger, basically. Again, in civilization, you don't feel that sort of existential danger in that way, right?
Yeah.
Except by like sudden, shocking, like a car swerves in front of you, like, oh shit, I almost died. But, like there's something different about that experience.
Yep.
And yeah, I think it's very meditative. I think it's, again, I wouldn't force anyone who doesn't want to go. I think that's very cruel. But I would love to go. I would love to encourage anyone who has never thought about it to think about it. Yeah, you could even, I think there's even like these VR headsets and stuff that
Yep.
you can wear and
Yep.
watch what it might be like. And yeah, it's a more profound, it's just one of many ways of thinking about, and this like goes all the way like the first question you're asking, right? How do you situate yourself in history, in space, in time, in your life? And sometimes the way to do that is to just get out of your daily life and get out of your daily space, and just, so it literally goes into space. You get to see yourself and the world from a different perspective, and I think that's very valuable.
Well said. Well said. And I think that's a perfect way to end this Amazing conversation. I really want to thank you again. This has been amazing. Clocking in at an hour 30 or so. It's been a long time coming. So thank you so
Yeah.
much, Visa, for coming on Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much to Visakan Veerasamy. He is at the forefront of building scenes, interacting through digital storytelling, and an advocate for focusing on what you want to see more of. Please pick up his amazing ebooks, Friendly Ambitious Nerds, and Introspect. Links will be in the description below. Now, before we go, please like this video if you found the discussion generative and intriguing. Leave a comment about your favorite part of the episode or who we should interview next, and subscribe for more eclectic content. And until next time, ad astra.